Welcome to Business Line's State of the Economy podcast, where you'll find insight, analysis, and the story behind the numbers.
Hello, friends. Welcome to today's episode of Business Line's State of the Economy podcast. I'm Amiti Sen. Today, we are going to talk about Indo-Russian ties amidst the ongoing Ukraine war. With Russia's war on Ukraine showing no signs of abating, the global spotlight seems to be more prominently on India-Russia relations. Economic ties between the two countries have been strong for decades. But over the past year, relations appear to have intensified, especially in terms of the jump in India's purchase of petroleum from the country. But is India's increased proximity to Russia a favorable development from all perspectives? Is it sustainable? With developed nations breathing down India's neck, what does the future hold? I have with me noted trade economist and former JNU professor Biswajit Dhar to give us a better idea of how things stand between India and Russia and the rest of the world. Dr. Dhar, welcome to the podcast. Dr. Dhar, Russia has been our long-standing trade and economic partner. I know it's a very wide question, but can you give us a brief idea of how the relationship evolved over time as we moved from the Cold War era?
The India-Russia relations actually have been a continuum. They've continued almost in the same way from Cold War era. And the continuity was through India's dependence on Russia for armaments. I was actually doing some back-of-the-envelope calculations as to how dependent India has been on Russia. And over the past 2 decades, the extent to which Russia has provided arms to India has been almost 5 times larger than what the US has provided. So quite clearly, this is a very important aspect of our India-Russia relations, especially in a situation where India finds itself in a geopolitical bind in South Asia with 2 hostile neighbors. So it is not surprising that India's relationship with Russia has been extremely strong and it is actually quite enduring. So, as I said, the continuity from where we left off from the Soviet era.
Now that the Ukraine war is upon us, so how has a Ukraine war affected India's ties with Russia? See, we are of course buying more oil at cheap prices from the country, but why is the rupee trade mechanism which India has devised, especially with this trade in mind, why is that not taking off?
Now, the major problem, again, this is a legacy issue, is coming from Cold War era where we had rupee-ruble trade. It's really the fact that India has always had a trade deficit with Russia. If you look at commercial imports, even there you find that there is a huge trade deficit. Of course, if you throw in the armament side, the deficit goes up considerably. Now, the problem was that the Soviet Union then was saddled with huge rupee stocks, not knowing what to do. And after the Soviet Union broke up, the Russian Federation took almost a decade and a half to resolve that problem. Now, we are back in the same situation that we were, when the breakdown of the Soviet Union took place, namely the Russians holding huge rupee reserves. So this is an area of concern for the Russians, and not surprisingly, the Foreign Minister Lavrov mentioned this, that we are trying to resolve this problem. One way in which India and Russia have been trying to skirt this problem has been to go through the UAE, do this kind of a third country, use a third country to provide momentum to our trade relations. And as you mentioned, that this has really gone up very significantly. And if I can share some numbers with you, our imports from Russia in 22-23 had gone up to $43 billion from about $9 billion a year before. The import was $46 billion, and the trade deficit is now $43 billion. And there are no signs of this coming down. And apart from petroleum, the crude oil that we're importing, and Russia is now the largest source, we are also importing coal and petroleum products and fertilizer as well. So we have some big ticket items which we are importing from Russia. So I don't see how imports from Russia are going to come down in a hurry.
When the whole Ukraine war started and we started getting oil at a discounted rate from Russia, and the government started thinking in terms of putting in place this rupee trade mechanism. So there was this big hope that because of the increased exports from Russia, Russia would also increase big time from India. And Russia also made the right noises. I mean, it started making inquiries into the kind of items that it can import from India. And I think there were some trade delegations which came here, but we haven't seen anything materializing. So why is that? is that a pipe dream for India, and Russia actually does not need to import from India to continue its exports?
So I think the question that we need to ask is that, when we have some of our sectors which have become big exporters over the past 2 years, and here I'm referring to electronic sector, and especially the mobile phone industry, which has been exporting big time. So there's been huge increase. Question that I've been asking myself is that why is it mobile phone exporters are not interested in exporting to Russia? Now, here is a country which is suffering from sanctions, which needs electronics products because all these are under stricter sanctions. Now, one of the reasons that I could think is that the technology for the mobile industry largely comes from the West. The mobile phone industry is playing safe. They don't want to increase their exports to Russia and give an impression that they are helping Russia bypass the sanctions. Otherwise, there is no reason why Indian industry won't export to Russia. So this is absolutely unthinkable. So we are back to a situation where we are only exporting our traditional items, which was pharmaceuticals and some chemicals, some iron and steel. But the exports there also have been sticky.
Right. So what you're saying is that for certain items, such as mobile phones that you pointed out, there could be some kind of a self-regulation that our industry is itself imposing on itself, fearing, third country sanctions.
Precisely.
So that brings me to my next question. India sourcing more and more oil from Russia. How long do you think the West will look the other way? I mean, the EU is already making some noises. So do you think that in the future the clamor is going to grow stronger?
No, I think I don't know how European Union is making that kind of noise, because one of the largest importers of petroleum products from India is actually the European Union. Their imports from India have just skyrocketed. So they're actually taking advantage of the fact that India has now become a huge producer of petroleum products. And they're also able to bypass the sanctions. So they're not being seen to be importing from the Russians, but yet they're getting advantage of crude being processed in India. I think that the Western allies are going to they'll keep making this statement. But at the end of the day, there are certain compulsions that European Union in particular faces unless they find alternate sources of petroleum products. And if that's not easy, then they can't actually let go their imports from India. So I think we have to live with this kind of a situation, this kind of a double talk, but the situation on the ground is unlikely to change.
That brings me to my final question. So, where do you see things moving from here? Because, when the Ukraine war started, people were thinking in terms of week, of a few weeks, the war lasting a few weeks. But it's going on, and it's over a year, and it's showing no signs of abating. So, if the West manages to decouple from Russia completely, do you think it could make a significant difference in India-Russian and Indo-Russian relationship? Or as you said, that the EU seems to be engaging in double talk, and this is the double talk is something which is going to continue. So how do you see things shaping up if war goes on and on?
I don't think even the West can afford to put sanctions that impose a body blow on the Russian economy, because of a failed Russian state is going to be a worse problem for the West. Because if the Russian economy is just allowed to crumble, it is going to be extremely bad news for the West. So there is going to be this thing that I call muddling through. The West is going to be sort of supporting the Ukrainians. They'll do it for their own reason. The armament industry is getting a huge boost as a result. We'll be left in a situation where global uncertainties will increase. And given the fact that this year the Western economies are expecting a slowdown, and some estimates say that is going to be a significant slowdown, this uncertainty arising from the Ukraine-Russia conflict thrown into that basket is going to be bad news for the global economy. Well, India, I think, is not going to be that badly affected. India has cushioned itself by getting access and the promise of cheap oil. And as long as India can get this guarantee, and this is going to be a huge hedge against inflation, Indian economy could actually look at a situation where these global disruptions is not going to hit it so badly.
On that happy note, I think we'll bring this discussion to an end. Thank you so much, Dr. Dhar, for helping me and our listeners have a better understanding of the complex economic and diplomatic aspects of the relationship between India and Russia. It is indeed a dynamic situation, and a lot may change in the coming months. I hope we can have you again with us sometime soon for more such discussions. Thank you
Thank
so
you.
much.
Thank you, Amiti. It was a pleasure speaking to you.